Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, back to the Valley of the Judged. I am your one and only gaming monk, better known as Mildra, and with me is my good brother here in the temple, the man of 1,000 runes, the CEO of Zidari Enterprises, and the bane of my fucking existence, good brother Xanatrix.
Zidari Enterprises would like to remind you that, Zidari Enterprises doesn't have any reminders this week. Have a good week.
Oh, well, I've got one. Fuck Harmony Gold.
That's always a good one.
Yeah. I'm getting practice in for next month. So, but with that said, it is. You have no idea how tempted I was to make jokes regarding a certain pair of twin guard dogs that we know, given the subject matter tonight. But we've danced around it a fair bit, but tonight we are diving headfirst into the combat section proper, which is appropriately named Violence. So, I know this joke has been run into the ground. When has that stopped us? But remember, violence is not the answer. Violence is the question. Violence is the question, and the answer is yes. But some of this is going to be revisiting some of the dice mechanics we've covered before. If you want to know our details on that, go watch some of the previous videos in this series. Everything is playlisted. Once I have a website set up, I will have everything in one convenient spot. But we've already seen the concept of this with the inflict violence sections within each of the archetypes, and now we're just seeing how it's going to be working proper.
Yes. Proper violence.
So it opens up. Gubat-Banwa is a game of rapid kinetic martial arts, violent sorcery, heart-rending convictions, and bouts of will. Warriors that channel gods face sorcerers that master black arts. Martial artists who have unlocked a new form of cultivation clash swords with those English.
You want me to take this month? Sounds like you're having some trouble.
The night alchemies. No, I just got thrown off for a second.
Well, I still want to take the When Violence Breaks Out list.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Violence is a tactical affair. Never dive into violence if the outcome isn't uncertain, and they put this in bold. If the enemies are no match for the Kandugnan, or vice versa, resolve it in striving. Violence commonly lasts 1 to 4 hours. Gubat-Banwa assumes that violence will be a major focus of games, and every session might have 1 or 2, or is building up to the eventual breakout of 1. That tends to be how I run my campaigns anyways. I tend to treat an individual session as like an episode of a TV series. And it's very rare that you're going to have all that many fights in the span of like one 30-minute TV series. Like you'll have a build up to the violence, usually in the climax act, and that'll be it. And I know some might bring up certain shonen fighting manga, but in those kind of situations, you either have one long protracted fight in certain arcs, or you still end up having one fight with the threat of the week. So the rule still applies.
Yeah.
Should we get to the sidebar next, or go ahead?
I think the side you should take the sidebars, but I'm still taking When Violence Breaks Out just because I have a
I know why you want to take that. So just to get into the sidebar, Gubat-Banwa's combat system is known as the Thundering Tactics Battle System, or TTB. It focuses on blisteringly quick martial arts in a grid environment where every attack is a flurry of blows and every defense are perfect parries. And perfect play. Gubat-Banwa is a vast game that has a lot of moving effects to keep track of, especially at the higher rungs of play. This can often cause us to forget effects or play suboptimally. Don't worry about that. The TTB has been written in such a way that forgetting a few effects or not capitalizing on your off-turn abilities does not set you back considerably. It's fine to forget effects. Focus on what you can catch and the martial arts fiction you're generating from playing.
That's pretty cool.
Mm-hmm. So then we get to when violence breaks out, and I will let you take that.
When violence breaks out, the Umala god or one of the Kandunganung must do the following in order. Number 1. Define the victory and defeat conditions. Number 2. Lay out the battle grid. Make this 16 by 16 on average. Do not make it smaller than 10 by 10, and do not make it larger than 24 by 24. Number 3. Define the terrain. According to the fiction, i.e. where the fight is taking place, define elevation. Then go around the table, asking each Kandunganon to point out either one object, one terrain type, or one elevation change. Then define the weather. 4. Put down the enemies. These are those opposed to the Kandunganon and are hindering them from achieving their victory objective. Make sure to keep the violence score in mind. You may use the divination rules to generate names and traits for each enemy as the need comes up. 5. Choose a starting zone for the Kandunganon. This is usually a 4x2 zone starting from any side or corner, as makes the most fictional sense. A Kandunganon must choose one tile within that zone to deploy their fighters in. 6. Divine the will of the powers. Roll 4d8 and divine what that means. This is the only time you'll be rolling to divine the powers. And finally, 7. When violence erupts, lightning from a storm cloud, utter the violence mantra. Seize heaven's thunderclaps! Violence until glory! And then the fight begins at Resound 1.
Oh. So, after that we have a very lovely 2-page spread that goes into divining the will of the powers. When you begin a fight, one of you, most likely the Umagalad, has to roll 4d8. Divine the will of the Duwada. Read the results. For every even result, each Kandunganon gains a Thunderbolt. For every odd result, add +1 to the Gaba pool. If there are equal amounts of odds and even results, or there are more odd results, an enemy riffs first. If there are more even results, a Kandunganon riffs first. Then we have the victory and defeat conditions. These must be defined before the fight begins. The default in tactics games are defeat all enemies. Below are other ideas. So victory and both of them can be randomly generated on a d6. Defeat the leader. Ensure the escape route. Survive for 6 full resounds. Current objective. Survive.
Yep.
Recruit 4 fighters. Make an offering to all shrines. Escort a VIP across the map. Oh, lovely. Escort missions. Everybody loves escort missions, said no one ever. Defeat conditions. An ally can Go ahead.
There is one escort mission that gamers like. BioShock Infinite, because 1, you don't actually have to defend your escort. And 2, she's useful.
Mm-hmm. Anyway. Defeat conditions. An ally Kandunganon is defeated. An established VIP is wounded. An ally falls in love with an enemy, a particular place is breached, an ally attacks a specific enemy, and items are used.
No item run. Got it. There's also a sidebar about on defeat there, Monk.
On defeat. Remember, too, that defeat for Kandunganon will almost never mean death for them. Kandunganon are too precious to kill. They will usually be captured, made to do new adventures for their new master, to whom they now owe obligations. Always remember the law of rosy gold. Unless otherwise stated, every fighter in violence is aware and ready and is actively defending and attacking unless their status is changed. Death is never the end.
I like that.
Oh. So then we have the rhythm.
Mm-hmm.
And I will let you take that.
All right. First, I want to read the sidebar, actually. Rhythm, resounds, riffs, beats. Gubat-Banwa's turn order is inspired by the fact that in ancient Southeast Asia, wars would be signaled with the clanging of gongs and drums. I'm pretty sure war drums have been a thing in every culture ever, but okay. Every part of violence, therefore, is music-related. Additionally, in the Anuvaran faith, the foundational essence of the world, is in sound. That sounds an awful close to Sanskrit Om. I wonder why. The rhythm is the turn order of Gubat-Banwa. We begin from resound 1, as in the resounding of a gong struck once. Resounds are usually 12-second long engagements of hand-to-hand combat and esoteric sorcery. Martial arts moving at the same time, waiting, sizing... I think it's supposed to be martial artists. Mm-hmm. Moving at the same time, waiting, sizing each other up, trading blows, or performing combinations. For both fun and consistency, the fight has been split into resounds, which are made up of riffs. Most fights last for 3 resounds on average. When violence begins, a Kadunganon or NPC riffs as established by divining the will of the powers. Then you alternate. After a Kadunganon is an NPC and vice versa. However, each fighter can riff only once per resound. This means if there are more enemies than Kadunganon, they will most likely have an action advantage. That's fine. The Kadunganon can handle it. A resound ends when all fighters have riffed. The first riff of the next resound depends on who riffed last. If it was an NPC, then a Kadunganon riffs first. If choosing who to riff is difficult, or for NPCs, if you're playing solo, follow the common rhythm. Sentinels riff first, followed by witches, then raiders, then sharpshooters, then mediums. That's actually cool that they have a turn order based on your role. Mm-hmm. Then there's outside of your riff. Break. Kadunganon are always moving. Even if it's not their time to riff, they have a floating action ready to use at any given time. Outside of your riff, you always have 1 break. Once you spent it, you can't use a break again until you refill them at the start of your next riff. By default, there are no break basic techniques. Gain them from your signature techniques and anting. Breaks always have a trigger, from which you can use the break in that specific moment when that trigger happens in the specified area and against a specified target. Mm-hmm. So we figured those were interrupts from the way they were described.
Yeah, and now we've got confirmation.
Mm-hmm.
So then we have riffs. There is a sidebar regarding the whole 12-second thing with resounds, but we've already covered that, so I'm not going to revisit that.
Mm-hmm.
Riff, the fighters move. They activate, fulminating into action. In the start step, first regain any spent break, suffer damage from a flame, heal from regenerating, and any effect that ends at the start of your riff. Trigger thunderbolt effects, including gaining them, if any. Perform any effect that triggers at the start of your riff. This can be done in any order chosen by the one inflicting the effect. If there's conflict, Kadunganon resolve first.
I like the fact that fire damage is... If you're on fire, you take fire damage before regenerating, meaning you could die before regen could go off.
Mm-hmm.
That's hilarious.
Then we have the action step. You get 3 beats to spend to do techniques, and you can never have more than 5 beats. The following are basic techniques that every fighter can do, usually costing 1 beat each. So beats are based. So we have an action point system instead of a hierarchy of action types.
Mm-hmm.
So the basic techniques are climb, double your jump, and then move 1 die. Deflect,
move 1 tile.
Tile. Deflect. Inflict demerit on all attacks against you until the start of your next riff. Nice. Inflict violence. Self-explanatory. Interact. Use this on an item that you have. Self-explanatory. You can't use interact to make attacks. Rally. Heal 1/4 of your max posture. Then gain +2 to all your defenses until the end of your next riff. One per violence. This is second wind. This is literally second wind from 4th edition.
Mm-hmm.
Rush. Move a number of tiles up to your speed, flipping, sliding, twirling, even diagonally. I'm always glad that whole no diagonals or limited diagonals thing from back in the 2000s has been dead.
Yeah.
You cannot move through enemies, but you can move through allies, but not end in their tiles. And shove. Choose one adjacent fighter, push them one tile. Although, whenever I see shove, I always end up asking the question, But can it wallbang?
We have we saw earlier that some things that tell you to slide enemies or to push enemies or to blast enemies or to throw enemies, if they collide, they took damage. So there is collision damage. I just don't know if shove counts.
If I'm running things, it does.
I also like here that I got the number wrong. I used to think that 2 beats were probably the full action round, but it's 3.
Mm-hmm.
And so all those ones that we saw that cost 2 beats, I'm like, you still have 1 beat left. Holy shit, nice.
See, then
I like that.
Then we have the end step. At the end of a rift, do the following in order: suffer damage from poisoned, and any effect that ends at the end of your rift. Trigger thunderbolt effects, including gaining them, if any. Perform any effect that triggers at the end of your rift. This can be done in any order chosen by the one inciting the effect. If there's conflict, Kanduganon resolve first. There is also.
I love that there's a thunderbolt check at both the beginning and end.
This kind of thing is beating you over the head that you should not be hoarding thunderbolts, you idiot.
Or that remember that your thunderbolts are coming in, so continue to use your gameplay loop.
Mm-hmm. But you know how it is with how some people want to be over conservative, the whole too good to use kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
No, with this, thunderbolts are combat momentum. You should be gaining them and losing them frequently.
Yes, and we saw that with every kit that we looked at when we were looking at the disciplines.
Mm-hmm. So,
next we move on to damage. Damage compounds upon you, withers away at your strength. Whenever you receive damage, you add it on top of the current damage you have. If damage you suffer meets or exceeds your posture, then the damage that puts you equal to or over your posture is a killing strike, and you suffer defeat. You cannot suffer more damage than your posture. While you have a number of damage equal to half your posture or more, you are staggered, representing your waning defenses and exhaustion. Your blade grows brittle. However, as we saw with some of the disciplines we looked at, being in staggered is good for them. Defeat. When you suffer a killing strike, you become defeated, and you suffer a mortal wound. You're unfocused. You're grasping at life. Reeling. Don't give up now. Into the tiger's lair. While defeated, every time you suffer damage, you instead suffer 1 more wound. While defeated, you suffer the same penalties of stunned. Once you are healed for any amount, you are brought out of defeated. You found a second wind. When you gain 5 wounds, you may decide to justify how your conviction lets you hold on. If you do, spend a thunderbolt and then mark your conviction. That must change before the next session. Then ignore the 5th wound and remove damage equal to your staggered value. Otherwise, you are killed and removed from the battlefield. When you find repose, heal all damage but not wounds. When you're healed, you deal damage only. You only heal wounds during downtime, provided you have enough time to heal them. And even then, you only heal 1. And it has a thing about rolling percentage. Roll D100 or 2D10, choosing one as the 10's place and the other as the 1's place. Okay, so a lot of people who say roll percentile dice don't specify that it can just be 2D10s. Or in most cases, it's 2D10s because the specialized percentile die of D10s can only be got by usually purchasing either large dice packs like the pound of dice from Chessex, or full 7-die polyhedral sets. They're not easy to get.
Yeah, and whenever it comes to percentile die, if anyone breaks out the golf ball, I immediately tell them go back and get 2D10.
Golf. I mean, they used to make D100s literally by just putting golf balls with some beads inside a plastic case that was 100 faced. Used to. Now there are actual D100s, but
yeah, but
it's a thing.
Even the actual D100s, I look at that and I just see, why am I not hitting this out on the driving range?
I know. But when an effect so you roll D100 when an effect says that you have an X% chance of something taking place. You must roll equal to or lower than X for the listed effect to take place. I'm not until we see how violence is rolled, whether you're trying to roll low or roll high, because we only ever saw roll number plus stat versus parry or resilience, and we
I
didn't.
have a feeling that percentage rolls are going to be in a significant minority.
Mhm. Even if they're in a significant minority, if everything is supposed to be roll high and this is the only one that rolls low, I don't like it. We want everything to remember, everybody. As Monk and I continue to say, all roads should lead to Rome.
Mm-hmm.
And then, additionally, when you're not sure about fictional interactions, you can roll a 50% chance of it happening or not.
Yeah. If
We
I'm
have
running and I have to do with percentile thing, honestly, I'd rather flip it. I'd rather say this is a percentile thing, and you have to aim high. Much in the way of, say, Rollmaster or actually Rollmaster's the main one, as well as its successors like Anima and Against the Dark Master.
And then we have a small little section here about legend.
Mm-hmm.
A Kadunganon's strength and glory is honed and sharpened as their legend grows. Legends separate Kadunganon from the Nora warrior. They are separated from the shaft. Their steel is damascened as opposed to the weak and brittle metals of the normal warriors. There's legend is added to. I don't know what it's added to. And then it says you gain +2 posture per legend.
I think it's supposed to be adding to posture.
Maybe so.
Yep.
But that's a bit. It probably needs a rewrite. To be honest.
Then we have attributes and prowesses. There are two major stat lines used in battle. Attributes are the ones practiced from your discipline. Prowesses are your Kanduganon's combat skills. So the attributes you have are posture, which represents your composure, the speed of your defensive maneuvers, and your ability to parry blows into glancing strikes, or weather blows that do strike home. Staggered is when you have damage equal to half your posture value or higher, so bloodied. Speed, how many tiles you can move. Jump, the elevation difference that you can leap off or fall from. You cannot move into a tile that has an elevation difference greater than your jump. 2 jump means you cannot go to a tile with +3 elevation from 0. Which, in doing this, aside from it being a very FF Tactics kind of mode of thinking, it also means jump is actually useful.
Mm-hmm.
But I do want, before I get into, let me go with the last attribute first. Evade determines how well you can completely avoid an attack's effects. Then there's a sidebar about posture. Every attack in Gubat-Banwa is a fierce exchange of blows, parries, catching, or evading. This is why posture is used. Every instance of damage reduces your composure in battle until you are blown wide open and suffer mortal wounds, forcing you to become defeated. I am glad that this is done because there's been a bit of a false assumption regarding hit points over the years. Namely that hit points are treated a bit too much like health.
Mm-hmm.
Which is why when healing surges were brought into 4th edition, you had a bunch of people making Wolverine jokes because of the idea of a surge of healing power. And the smart people, including myself, corrected them by saying HP has always been an abstraction of your combat condition. It's never been a direct wound system. We already have that in other affairs.
It's also why they make the jokes about popping a potion.
Mm-hmm. But with something like posture or morale or something like that, that doesn't have that same stigma, so you can make it clear early on that this is meant to be abstract.
Mm-hmm.
I know some people have a boner for realism, but the people who have a boner for realism don't actually play that many games as they claimed that they do.
Mm-hmm.
But then we have prowesses. Like skills, prowesses start at 1 and never go above 8. You start with 4 points to spend at Kaduganon creation, but none can go above 3. So we have ferocity, strength, speed, and force of your physical strikes and weapon assaults. Spirit determines the strength of your spirituality, the sharpness of your will, or your esoteric knowledge, or otherwise your ability to tap into the forces beyond mortal ken. Parry, your ability to deflect, turn away, dodge, or otherwise triumph against most physical attacks. Hesitation is defeat, this is a defense. And resilience, your toughness, hardiness, ability to weather the hurricane, magical effects, and other mystical harm, gained through conditioning, meditation on the principles of the universe, ululating the diamond body mantra, this is a defense.
Mm-hmm.
So we have physical and magical attack and defense with the prowesses, actually.
Yeah.
Then we have Gubat. I will let you take that.
Gubat making attacks. First, there's a side note about multiple dice. If a technique's violence die has more than one die, for example 3d4, then you count each die separately for the purposes of evade and chains and criticals. If you roll a 3d4 melee attack and you roll a 1-4-4, then you roll 2 more chain dice. The 1 is considered evaded. An attack with multiple dice is only considered evaded if all dice are evaded. Otherwise, the evaded die is simply not added to the damage. That's really nice. And so, when you wield your martial art to commit tremendous violence upon another, 1. Choose the specific technique, choose appropriate targets, and then roll appropriate dice. Your violence dice, expressed in most effects in brackets as DX. Any modifications to the violence dice are applied here. This can bring the violence dice's result to higher than their maximum. E.g., if you rolled an 8 on a D8 and you have +1 to violence dice, then that becomes a 9. If a melee attack, you roll the highest number on your die, you roll the highest number on your die, you chain. If the ranged attack and you roll the highest number on your die, you critically hit. If the violence dice rolled equal to or lower than the defender's evade stat, the defender evades the attack and its effects completely. The attack ends. The effects of a technique are evaded by the defender if they are supposed to affect the target. If they affect other entities, then that effect still applies to the other entities. Then you add the technique's attacking stat, whether it be ferocity or spirit, along with any other additional damage modifiers. This is your initial damage. Then the defender defends. The defender reduces the initial damage equal to the appropriate defense as defined by the attack, parry, or resilience. Add any other damage modifiers here. Afterward, this is the total damage. If damage is reduced to 0 or below, it still deals at least 1, which is minimum damage. And then you gain the total damage as damage. Makes sense.
And because of the way inflict violence works, the default die is not set. It ultimately depends on your choice of discipline.
Mm-hmm.
And let's see then. So, what did you? This is starting to remind me of what we talked about when we talked about the MCDM RPG of shifting away from the roll to hit in the traditional sense.
Mm-hmm.
You are still rolling to hit, but it's not exactly the same. But then we have the Trihamsa, the 3 attack types. So we have melee attacks, targets nearby fighters, benefits from flanking. Can chain. When you roll the highest possible result or higher on a violence die, roll another die and add it on top, known as your chain dice. This chain die does not keep any modifiers, but can keep chaining until it no longer rolls a chain. Alright, so then we have ranged attacks. Targets faraway fighters, affected by vantage. If attacking a target below minimum range, suffer 2 demerit. Can critically hit. When you roll the highest possible result or higher on the violence die, wait, isn't that redundant? Simply add the attack's defined prowess again to the damage.
So what it's saying there is the highest possible result or higher. It means the plus how there are bonuses that add to your chain die or to your violence die. Like earlier when it said if you roll a d8, you roll an 8, but can still get a 9 because of the +1.
Mm-hmm.
And then you add the attack's defined prowess again to the damage. So a lot of ranged attacks use, from what we've seen, Spirit. So let's say that this was a d8 plus Spirit attack, and you rolled an 8. So you'd add d8 plus Spirit again.
Mm-hmm.
So a critical hit doubles your static modifier. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's a way. It's a way to and because of that, it actually means there's a benefit to having. Because of how this is set up, there's benefits to having low dice. You may not do as much damage, but you do have an option. You do have an easier chance of spiking. Yep. Why does that sound very familiar?
I don't know. I can't possibly imagine why, Monk. I don't know. Why is rolling d6s more extra effort dice, Monk? I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
You know. I would like to point out that melee attacks chain dice is basically just exploding dice.
Mm-hmm.
Except better. Because it's just it can also trigger effects. Most of the time exploding dice doesn't trigger effects.
Mm-hmm.
But chaining in this one can. Now, of course, there are people who have breaks that do combo breaker, but remember that there are some inflict violences and special signature techniques that say ignore combo breaker.
Mm-hmm. So then we have area attacks. These are the only attacks that target multiple fighters and will have a pattern: burst, blast, line, or path. Does not benefit from vantage or flanking. An attack with area, range 1 to 3, burst 1, can let you choose an origin point within 1, 2, or 3 tiles of you, and then a burst 1 erupts from that. When performing area attacks, roll the damage once for all targets. If your attack would do more damage to one target within the area, add the extra dice just for that target, or roll merit and demerit just for that target. Then we have range. When counting ranges, you start from the minimum range always. 2 means you start counting from any tile that is exactly 2 tiles away from you. Effects that affect yourself must say either self or have a range of 0, meaning it starts counting from your tile. Most ranged effects will have range bands are in range bands X, Y. That means you can target within X, Y tiles, so 3 to 5 means the target can be within 3 to 5 tiles of you. X is minimum range, Y is maximum range. If there is only one number, then the target must be exactly X tiles away from you. So a fighter at range 3 is any fighter exactly 3 tiles from you. No more, no less.
Nice. There's some very useful sidebars there as well, Monk. You might want to take those.
Mm-hmm. The first one is order of operations. When rolling, rarely you will need to divide or multiply. In general, follow this: multiply, then divide, then add, then subtract.
Unlike actual mathematic order of operations, where multiplication and division happen at the same time in order from left to right,
mm-hmm.
and then addition and subtraction happen at the same time in order from left to right. That's an interesting set of hierarchy there.
Mm-hmm. Then we have adjacency. In the battle grid, every tile that touches a side or corner of your own tile, all 8 tiles around you, as well as the squares on +1, -1 elevation of you, they are technically touching your tile as well on a 3-dimensional plane, are adjacent to you. And then
that makes sense.
Yep. Then verticality. Determining distance is as follows: count their distance horizontally as normal, starting from adjacent to the origin tile, and then count how much the elevation difference is between the origin and the target. The higher of the two is the distance they are from the origin tile. Basically, you're counting horizontal, then vertical when it comes to determining distance. This also means that definitely means that range attacks are going to be benefiting from the high ground.
Yeah, because it says the higher of the two is the distance they are from the origin tile.
Mm-hmm. But
all right, so we get to the next section. I'm going to read that sidebar first, called beforehand/afterward. Timing is important in Gubat-Banwa. Many times there will be a temporal trigger, such as when you suffer an attack, followed by an effect. Somewhere in that effect will have either beforehand or afterward. This means that the effect takes place before the triggering effect, e.g., when you make an attack, you may fly 2 afterwards, means you fly 2 after you result the attack. Oftentimes, more specific timings will have their timings written down, such as apply D12 before you apply defenses. But then we have stronger the enemy, fiercer the heart. On an attack, if you deal just 1 or less damage on all targets or your attack is evaded by all targets of that attack, gain a thunderbolt. See, everybody can gain thunderbolts just from doing minimal damage or missing.
Mm-hmm.
This retribution extends to enemies. If their attack deals 1 damage or their attack is evaded, add +1 to the Gaba pool. Interesting. Combo Breaker. Attacking relentlessly brings the threat of overreaching. On your second attack in a riff, you suffer 2 demerit. On the third attack and beyond in a riff, you suffer 3 demerit. And that's where it's talking about ignore the effects of Combo Breaker.
Mm-hmm.
No.
This makes actions that have flurry particularly nasty.
Mm-hmm. Because they're technically the same attack.
Mm-hmm.
You're just spending a beat to do an additional effect. Then we have tactical considerations. The following are the tactical modifiers. Flanking. If you and an ally are standing directly on both sides or corners of a target, you are flanking. Your melee attacks gain merit against the flanked fighter. Vantage. Here's the ranged people taking the high ground, monk.
Mm-hmm.
When you make a ranged attack against a target on a lower elevation, gain merit. On a higher elevation, suffer demerit. Area attacks ignore this. Makes sense. Targeting. Objects can be targeted by any effect, even if it says an ally. If you have line of sight and effect to a target, they are a valid target and can be attacked. Otherwise, the attack is invalid. Line of sight and effect. When making an attack, draw an invisible line from the center of the origin tile to the center of the target's tile. If the line is obstructed in any way by blocking terrain, the attack targets the thing blocking the line instead. Most attacks also require line of sight to be able to pick that target in the first place. Enemies block line of sight and line of effect. Allies do not. They can flip and corkscrew over your flying blades and fire Mentala. Okay. Shooting across elevations. If your line of effect goes through an elevation that is a difference of +1, that goes normally. But if the difference is 2 or more, then consider that blocking terrain. So for the purposes of the giant meteor of the star shooter, you only have to have something elevation 2 in front of you.
Mm-hmm. This means cover is useful, but it's not always going to save you, especially when giant fucking meteors are concerned.
Like I said, just get behind something that's two blocks taller than you are. You're fine.
Mm-hmm. But then we have merit and demerit in violence. Merit and demerit in violence work similar to striving. When you roll violence dice, you roll an extra number of dice equal to the number of merit or demerit, and then you keep the highest roll or the lowest roll, respectively. Merit and demerit still cancel each other out. If the attack's violence is a flat number instead of a die, you simply add +1 per merit and -1 per demerit. If the attack's violence die is 2 or more dice, you add an extra number of dice equal to your merit, but you only keep the highest X, with X being the number of violence dice. For example, if you roll 3d4 and have 2 merit, you roll 5d4 and keep the 3 highest results.
Nice.
See, then we have guard. When you guard something, it is almost always adjacent. While guarding another fighter, when they suffer an attack, there is a 50% chance of the target changing to you instead of the original target. Guard breaks when you move or are moved away from the one you're guarding.
Guard is specifically to guard for other people.
Mm-hmm.
And then I like that picture of what's essentially an anthropomorphic Shih Tzu wielding a giant sword.
Mm-hmm.
Then we get area patterns, but there's a particularly important sidebar here. Can I aim diagonally? Sometimes it might make sense to aim a line or path diagonally upward so it reaches up high. This is not allowed in the game. It breaks the inherent balancing of line and path and introduces too many considerations. It's not too much considerations, too many considerations. In the Chaos of Violence, you cannot aim your lines and paths diagonally upward or downward. That makes sense to me, actually.
Mm-hmm.
Like, this is like asking to aim it diagonally upward to hit somebody above you, but then continue on the line horizontally, essentially, which wouldn't work. But you can still aim diagonally in the grid. You just have to make sure there's no blocking terrain. That's all. Then we have area patterns. Area attacks don't benefit from vantage, flanking, nor suffer proximity. Area attacks always have patterns that define how their shape looks like. Blocking terrain stops a pattern's movement. Only bursts or blasts wrap around blocking terrain, but only if it's large enough for it. Finally, blast and burst have their horizontal size equal to their vertical size. A blast 3 affects all 3x3 tiles and all fighters within +3 and -3 elevation. That's fucking gross. Paths and lines still must have their squares touching each other. Thus, a line 3 tile cannot suddenly move through the tiles of the same elevation, and then another tile that is +3 elevation. This means lines and paths can only affect those in a +1 or -1 elevation difference of you, since the squares are still touching.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's some diagrams here.
Yep.
Oh! Path. Okay, so Monk, the difference between path and line, looking at these diagrams, is that a path can move.
It's exactly what I said it would be.
I don't think you ever said it that way.
Yeah. I distinctly recall saying that paths were not going to be set in a straight line.
Yes. But this is something like, if you wanted to do a path, you could just make it literally like if I wanted to make something a path that was path 10, I could make it zigzag around like a snake.
Mm-hmm.
A snake. But burst is pretty self-explanatory. Bursts out in all directions from the center point. But
all 4 of these are pretty much taken straight from the setup in 4E. The only difference is that there's no close burst. But close burst is basically blast.
Well, blast is a little bit different from burst.
Yeah. In this case, blast is a box, but it has to be adjacent to you. Like one tile has to be adjacent to the origin point.
Well, the origin point is if there is no specified range. But we have seen a few others that said like range 3 blast 2. That means that you could set the origin point out, and it's a box of 2x2 that has to have at least one of those boxes adjacent to the origin point. Mm-hmm. So burst comes out from the origin point. Blast is beside the origin point.
Yep. So then we have mantras. Mantras are keywords appended to techniques to modify them. Among the sages of the Sword Isles, mentalas are magical formulas written in esoteric mataram upon bamboo strips, used to perform a large variety of mystical effects. Most formal practices have used this format to codify their various methodologies. Attack inflicts some sort of violence. Aura is self-explanatory, I'd say.
Mm-hmm.
Block. When you suffer damage, you reduce block first, so block is akin to temp HP. In fact, it outright says it's temporary posture. And blocks cannot stack. Conducts electricity. Anything that conducts electricity suffers +6 damage when suffering lightning attacks. And then all fighters in burst 1 of the target are shocked. Oh, that could be fun. Fields are field effects. That's self-explanatory. Finisher. This was one I was curious about. This technique can only be used as the final beat in your riff. You cannot spend Thunderbolts to gain more beats after you've used the finisher.
Yep.
Let's see. So then we have Float. Self-explanatory. Flurry.
Well, I don't think float is self-explanatory. It says you ignore all terrain.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Flurry. You can spend another beat to activate that specific technique's flurry effect. See, then flying. If you're flying, you ignore all terrain and elevation and impose demerit on all melee attacks against you. You can move over enemy tiles, but you can't end your move in them.
That's why I said that float wasn't self-explanatory, because why would there be a differentiation between float and fly if there wasn't something special about fly?
Fair. Let's see, then guards. Usually will say which character is guarding by who. We already covered guarding. Heal. Self-explanatory. Immune. I'd say that's also self-explanatory.
Yeah.
Opener. This technique can only be used as your first beat in a riff. Relentless. Relentless attacks let you reroll any dice that come up as 1 once.
That's nice.
Mm-hmm.
It's brutal 1.
Yep. Skewering. Anything that can pierce through blocks, which is not a lot. This is a rare combat tag. Skewering attacks ignore block.
Meaning that you're still attacking their posture directly.
Mm-hmm. Let's see. Stance. This is self-explanatory. You cannot be in 2 stances at the same time. New stance always takes over the old one. Taunt. If a taunted fighter makes an attack that does not include the fighter that taunted them as a target, that attack suffers demerit. A fighter can only be taunted by 1 fighter at a time. Taunts supersede old ones. So, draw aggro, you know how this works. And we have teleport. Teleportation is not movement, it is displacement. The rest is self-explanatory, but it should note. This means it does not trigger effects that happen when you move. Teleportation ignores all terrain and all elevation. See, then true. True attacks and true damage cannot be reduced in any way.
Yep.
Let's see, then tumbling. Any movement part of this technique lets you move through enemies but not end in their tiles. And unavoidable. Attacks with this tag cannot be applied evasion against.
I don't like how that's phrased.
Mm-hmm.
Unavoidable is kind of self-explanatory. You can't evade attacks with this tag.
Yes, there is no escape.
Yep. I'll take this in the half of this page and then the next page.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we've got attack type mantras. The following mantras define an attack's type and how it might look in the fiction. Physical, self-explanatory. Soul, imbued with spiritual energy and vibration. Fire, self-explanatory. Sets people aflame. Water, also self-explanatory. Makes people doused. Going into water terrain and being soaked in water also douses. Cold, self-explanatory, inflicts chilled.
Mm-hmm.
Wind, sort of self-explanatory, except it puts out fires on the battlefield and removes a flame from targets. So the wind puts out fire. Lightning, self-explanatory and shocks. Completely useless against anything made of earth or rubber. Poison, self-explanatory and inflicts poison. And then gleam. This one was a little interesting. It's literally light. It's light attacks. This attack dazzles with bright radiance, inflicting dazed.
Mm-hmm.
So if they have those mantras, they also inflict those statuses. That's good to know for the discipline attacks. Then we have status effects. There's a nice sidebar that says when an attack or effect inflicts a status that a target is already suffering, the status is not applied again. Okay. I mean, yeah, but okay.
Mm-hmm.
Status effects are those that change the status of a fighter. This includes being set aflame, being burned, or dazed by combatants. Cleansing. Commonly, status effects will last for the entire violence unless they have a cleanse clause. When a status effect is cleansed, it is removed from the affected fighter. Overwrites. Any effect that overwrites another effect, such as strengthened, overwriting, debilitated, and vice versa. You first cleanse the overwritten effect, and then you gain the overwriting effect. There are two kinds of status effects, blessings and afflictions. Blessings are benefices and succor, beneficial effects that make you stronger or grant the fighter some sort of positive effect. Afflictions are malices and conditions, sicknesses and pestilences, negative effects that weaken a fighter and make them vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
So the start of the list of afflictions for you there, Monk?
Yep. We start with a flame. You're burning. Every start of your riff, you suffer 3 plus your rank and damage. Overwrites, chilled, and doused. You're vulnerable to water, fire, and wind attacks. Cleansed after you suffer a water or wind attack. Oh, so
Okay.
we've got some nice procs going in.
Yep.
Bleeding. When you move voluntarily, suffer 2 damage for every tile you leave. Cleanse at the end of your riff, or if you haven't moved at all, that riff.
Oh, hold on. It's only at the end of your riff if you haven't moved at all on that riff.
Yep.
Bleeding! Wait a minute, hold on. Monk! It's the bleeding effect from Monster Hunter 4!
Yep.
Where you have to crouch and do nothing for it to go away. Or eat Astera Jerky, but that's a different thing.
Mm-hmm.
Or not Astera Jerky. Astera Jerky's for World, which they also reintroduced bleeding at one point in.
Mm-hmm. Let's see. Chilled. Moving into a tile costs +1 speed, and your jump becomes 1. You're vulnerable to fire attacks, overwrites doused, cleansed after you suffer damage, or at the end of your next riff. Then confused. When you spend a beat before performing a technique, roll a d4. On a 4, suffer that as true damage, and you cancel your technique, wasting that beat. Cleansed after you
X is
suffer an
confused. They hurt themselves in their confusion.
Mm-hmm. Dazed. All attacks you make suffer demerit. All attacks against you have merit. Cleanse at the end of your next riff. Debilitated. Suffer -4 damage in all your attacks. Overwrite strengthened. Cleansed is cleansed at the end of your next riff. Doused. You're drenched in water or otherwise wet. You conduct electricity. You're vulnerable to lightning and cold attacks. Overwrites a flame. You're resistant to fire attacks. Cleansed at the end of your next riff. You're then juggled. You've been knocked into the air. You cannot apply any defenses. You cannot evade. Cleanse at the start of your riff as you drop to the ground.
Remember that one of our favorite disciplines can make themselves juggled on purpose just so they can turn it into unbound.
Mm-hmm. Poisoned. At the end of your riffs, you suffer 3 plus your rank damage. Overwrites regenerating. Vulnerable to poison attacks. Cleansed when you are healed beyond your maximum posture. And then we have slowed. Your speed becomes 2, and you cannot voluntarily move more than 2 tiles. Overwrites haste. Cleanse at the end of your next riff. Then we have shocked. You gain merit on all attacks against you. You cannot evade or perform breaks. You suffer -1 to your speed. You cannot provide flanking. Cleansed after you suffer damage or at the start of your next riff. Then stunned. You suffer -1 beat. You cannot spend or gain thunderbolts. You can't perform breaks. You gain merit on all attacks against you. You grant merit on all attacks against you. Sorry. And same with shock. Grants merit, not gain merit. You cannot provide flanking. Cleanse at the end of your next riff. And wide open. Your defenses are blown wide open. You're off balance. Suffer -D4 to all your defense. You cannot evade or guard. Overwrites protect. Cleanse at the end of your next riff.
Wide open's nice.
Mm-hmm. And I will let you take the blessings.
All right. So we have 5 of them. No, 6 of them, excuse me. We have float, which all your movement ignores terrain. Haste, your speed becomes 8. Overwrite slowed and cleansed at the end of your next riff. Protect, +4 to all your defends. Overwrites wide open, cleansed at the next riff. Regenerating. Every start of riff, heal 2 plus your rank. Overwrites poisoned. No cleansing. So it stays forever unless somebody poisons you again. Stealth. When you are attacked, before you suffer the attack, you have a 50% chance of avoiding the attack completely. When you suffer or deal damage, cleanse stealth after dealing damage. Any attack you make from stealth gains plus merit. Nice. Then we have strengthened. You're imbued with great might. Your hits thundering. +4 damage to all attacks. Overwrites debilitated. Cleanse to the end of your next riff. Then we have a couple more things. We have affinity. Vulnerable and resistant. When you suffer damage from an attack that you're vulnerable to, you suffer +D6 to the damage, which is the vulnerability die. When you suffer damage from an attack that you're resistant to, reduce the damage by D6, which is the resistance die. Usually a defender rolls this, reducing the damage before finding the total damage dealt. As always, resistance dice cannot reduce damage below 1. You can't have multiple vulnerability dice or resistance dice if your attack has multiple mantras, i.e. physical fire and gleam against a dead enemy. Gives you 2d6 vulnerability dice and 1d6 resistance dice. Both vulnerability dice and resistance dice modify damage and not the violent die. Mm-hmm. Finally, a clause about multiple statuses. If an effect would apply multiple statuses at the same time, you choose in which order to apply those statuses. This means that, yes, you can apply them in such a way that takes advantage of resistance. You can douse and then shock to deal extra damage. Effects that apply multiple statuses often require setup, so the major drawback is time.
Yep.
That's fun.
Let's see, and then we have movement. Movement into any adjacent tile costs 1 point of movement. Most commonly, you'll be moving up to your speed. Rushing is explicitly movement that is stylish and unique to you. You might be leaping off walls, swinging with wires, or stepping with the lightless technique. You cannot move through allies. You can move through allies, but not end in their tiles. You cannot move through enemies unless your technique has tumbling. You cannot move through diagonally across blocking terrain or enemies. You must go around them. Remember that evasion that has a difference of 2 from your tile is considered blocking terrain. Anything that has you leaving a tile except for teleportation is movement. See, and then we have jump. We already covered the basics of what jump is. If you fall from an elevation that is greater than your jump, you suffer X d6 true damage, with X being the difference in elevation you fell. So we do have fall damage. Then we have flying, which we already covered how flying is going to work. Let's see, then we have forced movement. Forced movement ignores speed, and there are 4 kinds of forced movement: push, pull, slide, and throw. Push pushes them further away. It cannot be to the sides. It must be farther from you. Pull, it has to be closer to you. Slide, forced movement in any direction, and throw, forced movement in a direction away from you, and the target must be further from you. Throw does not move through the intervening tiles. They arc over them and only moves to the final tile chosen, colliding only the target tile. If they collide with a fighter on a tile they end up in, they suffer collide and then move to any adjacent tile to the target. You can throw a fighter to a higher elevation so long as the target tile is within range. Let's see, then we have collide. When a target is pushed into higher elevation by forcefully moved into blocking terrain, an object or another fighter, they collide. When a target collides, they move into the target's tile, suffer 2 damage, return the last tile they left, and then the forced movement immediately ends, no matter how much movement is left.
So it's 2 damage for collisions.
Mm-hmm.
So shove would do a collision if they have like a wall right behind them or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Pretty much. Then we have teleport, which we already covered. Teleport is not movement.
Yep.
See, and
this moves us on to size.
Yep.
The Sword Isles are filled with warriors of all kind. More than one culture has traditions that tell the old story. The original inhabitants of the Sword Isles were giants, filled with spiritual power, closer to the gods than mortals. In general, larger sizes are treated as size 1 when it comes to effects, i.e. you cannot hit a size 2 enemy twice with an area attack. They only suffer leave a square effects once every time they move, etc. When moving or counting ranges with a fighter that is size 2 or higher, choose any of the tiles they are occupying as the origin tile, and then count from there as you would normally count with a size 1 fighter. After the movement, move the fighter in such a way that at least one of their tiles occupies the final tile of that movement. We have size 1/2 or smaller beings, such as little earth gods, geckos, ants, little lizards, and such. Size 1/2 is anything below 1 square tall and wide. They take up a quarter of a square. There's a sidebar here about size 1. Size 1 is, as with everything, an abstraction. It can be a small goblin ghoul or a mounted knight upon a rainbow raptor. Size 1 only takes up a single square on the grid. Finally, your size is commonly also your height. Size 1 means height 1. Height 1 means you take up 1 vertical elevation tile. And we have size 2. Should be reserved for large beings with the size of small pagodas. Demigods, young giants, or pygmy giants. Size 2 creatures take up 2 by 2 by 2 on the grid. Size 3 is for powerful, perhaps even legendary and mythical beings and beasts. These fighters take up a huge chunk of the grid and should be treated with both fear, awe, and should be treated with fear, awe, and grandeur. Creatures like serpent gods, hater demons, or elder giants, they take up 3 by 3 by 3. Size 4 for even larger beings, humongous colossi. Colossuses is not a word, it's colossi.
Mm-hmm.
Living bodhisattva statues. Ancient, ruinous, giant defense spirits, giant forest gods, they're 4 by 4 by 4. And size 5 are for giant, wrathful demons, elder gods, fierce dog-lion gods, ancient viscera witches, giant serpents, enormous deer spirits. Somebody's been watching Mononoke Hime. Infested giant demon boars. Somebody's really been watching Mononoke Hime. And even giant god bodies. Somebody's really, really been watching Mononoke Hime.
Mm-hmm.
They take up 5 by 5 by 5. However, they can far exceed this elevation and width in fiction, meaning outside of combat, outside of violence. Size 6 should not be modeled as a single fighter in the battlefield anymore. Instead, section their body parts into different size 5 fighters on the field. What? Okay. Size 7 plus should not be modeled as a fighter at all. Perhaps instead they are the battlefields on their own that the Kadunganon must damage or somehow quell. These are truly gargantuan beings. Should be reserved for truly godly beings. Beings of towering gargantuan bulk. These are crocodiles that cause a change in tides. Eagles whose wings block out the sun. Turtles that are entire islands on their own. Turtles all the way down, Monk. Primordial titans. Serpents that wind about entire mountains. Now somebody's been playing Monster Hunter again. Hello, Dolomater. And gods. Gods are size 7. And I'll take this last little bit and just leave you down at the battlefield, okay, Monk?
Alright.
A note on styles and riffing. As a team-based grid combat game, Gubat-Banwa's styles have skills and abilities that would best benefit the team when they riff in a particular order. And Gubat-Banwa is as follows. Sentinels benefit from moving first, as they very often are the ones that will engage the enemy, applying soft controlling effects to make sure the focus is on them. Witches benefit from moving directly afterwards to weaken already softened fighters, to move them into proper position, or to bombard them with crippling decisions. Raiders benefit from moving after this, to take advantage of the weakened ranks, breaking weak links, being able to kill those that need to be killed first, as dealing damage and using superior movement to get into positions opened up by witches and sentinels is what they were built to do. Sharpshooters benefit from moving later, to be able to pick out those enemies that can now be defeated easily from their positions, or to take advantage of enemies' final positions without having to move themselves. And mediums benefit from moving last, to fix any wounds that might have happened, to know the lay of the battlefield near the end of the resound, and to give proper buffs for the next resound.
Yep. And then we have a nice little diagram on height levels for the battlefield.
Of the battlefield.
The third pillar in Gubat-Banwa's combat is the battlefield. The Indra's net of 1-inch tiles that represents the space where violence explodes. It is composed of objects, terrain, and weather. And it gives a reminder about the sizes. Elevations are self-explanatory. We've already covered a lot regarding elevations. Out of bounds, when you're removed... In general, when you are moved onto a tile that is not the battlefield, you become out of bounds. You are removed from the battlefield until the end of violence. Good old ring outs.
K.O.
Let's see. The edges, after putting down the battlefield, define the edges of the battlefield. These are the limits of your battlefield, the 4 sides of your tile battlefield. They are either walls, meaning they can be collided against, or chasms, which means moving them puts you out of bounds. Walls at the edges are all very often indestructible, unless the fiction allows them to be destroyed. Then free tiles. In general, when a fighter or object is at least size 1 in a tile, they are occupying that tile. A tile that has nothing occupying them is a free tile. And then we have objects. These are basically items on the battlefield. Most objects are height 1, unless it says otherwise. Objects have a durability equal to their size times 10 at a minimum of 1. Durability works like posture. If brought to 0, they are destroyed. Remove them from the battlefield. Finally, objects can be targeted by any attack, even if the attack defines specifically allies or enemies. Similarly, area attacks that target a wide area of multiple fighters or enemies still affect the objects in their area. See, and then we have a handful of random objects that can be picked or rolled with a D10 roll. And in the page afterwards, each of them is given a bit more detail. Should we go into these or not?
Let me take a quick look. I think there's only 1, maybe 2 that are worth talking about.
Yeah, which ones?
The fire gecko and the idol.
The fire gecko is a size 1/2 height 0 object. When it suffers damage, it explodes, dealing 4d6 damage to everything in burst 2 and setting them aflame. So it's a good.
It's a landmine. That's why I wanted to cover it.
Yep. And the idol, Likha, Tau, etc.
Anthropomorphic.
Yeah, sorry. Construct of a god, whether it be a nature deity, a bodhisattva, or an ancestor. A size 1 object. All fighters that start their riff in burst 1 of the idol heal 3 posture. If an enemy destroys an idol, all Kanduganon gain 2 thunderbolts. If a Kanduganon destroys the idol, add +2 to the Gaba pool.
That's why I thought idol was good to cover. It has some really cool, unique effects.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, everything here is fairly straightforward. You know, trees, great trees, water pots, boulders, lightning rods, torches, doors, and walls.
Mm-hmm.
That's fairly straightforward.
Yep. So then
With that, we get into terrain.
Yep, I'll let you take that.
Terrain is the most important aspect of Gubat-Banwa's combat system. It defines how Kadunganung and NPCs will maneuver and interact with the environment. By default, terrain is normal. Nothing happens when you move into, stay, or start your riff while within this tile. There's a side note here that says the list is not exhaustive either. Slopes are tiles that have one or more sides lower than the others. Choose 1 to 3 sides of the tile as the lower tile. That tile is considered one elevation lower than the rest of the tile, meaning it can be moved into by those with lower jump, but only orthogonally through that tile. For those of you who don't know what orthogonal means, let me grab the actual meaning because I don't want to speak out my ass here. Relating to or composed of right angles, relating to a matrix whose transpose equals its inverse, or relating to linear transformation that preserves the length of vectors. We're considering relating to or composed of right angles. He could have just said perpendicular, to be honest. Essentially, people with a lower jump could, for example, if this is a elevation 3 that has slopes, and somebody only has jump 2, they can move into that square if they move into it from the side of that has the slope that lowers it to elevation 2. That's what it's trying to say.
Mm-hmm.
So you can't move into it from another side, but you could move into it from that one side. Or if you've chosen 3 sides, any of the 3 sides. Then there's currents. The Sword Isles are surrounded by water. Sword Isles is... No, that's bad. That's wrong. The Sword Isles are surrounded by water, and waters usually have currents. Rushing rivers, flowing seas. When a fighter moves into or starts their turn in a tile with a flowing current, slide them one tile in the direction of the current, as defined by the battlefield. If the current is particularly strong, you may make it so that it slides them up to 3 tiles. Then we have a list of different terrains. Difficult terrain all the way through chasm. I think we kind of at least have to go a little bit over these since they do define how mechanics work. Difficult terrain costs an +1 speed to move through. Dangerous terrain deals 2 true damage every time you move through it. Blocking terrain you can't move through. Anything that is on fire deals 3 true damage and sets you aflame.
Mm-hmm.
Poisonous pits seem fairly explanatory. You're poisoned if you move into a poisonous pit, and if you're already poisoned and you move into a poisonous pit, you immediately take poison damage once per riff. Shallow water costs 1 speed to move into, and it douses you, and when you're in shallow water, you're vulnerable to lightning attacks. But being in shallow water also is just like stopping, dropping, and rolling, you're not on fire anymore. Deep water. Okay, so yeah, that's another thing. Shallow water and deep water. Shallow water are lakesides, the shores, surf, things that are basically up to your ankles. Deep water is anywhere between waist and chest high. Costs 2 speed to move through, and you can't make any attacks while you're in it. When you're in it, it douses you. You're vulnerable to lightning, cleanses flame. Tall grass. You cannot move diagonally through tall grass. That's interesting. All attacks against you from outside of the tall grass suffer demerit. However, tall grass is flammable, and it can also be cut down with physical or wind attacks, turning it into normal terrain. Interesting. You can do some terrain change. Haze, which is places obscured by fog or smoke. While in a haze tile, enemies adjacent to you can target you. And hazes can be blown away by wind. And then the chasm. A pit whose bottom cannot be found. When you fall into a chasm, there is a 50% chance of going out of bounds. Otherwise, move into an adjacent tile of the chasm. Use this sparingly. And there's also a tiny thing about weather. It says default weather is clear, where nothing is different. Indoor fights always have clear weather. But then there's the 8 weathers. Rainy. Ranged attacks suffer demerit, and all ranges suffer -1 to a minimum of 1. And nothing can be set aflame, and fires are always extinguished. Everyone becomes doused. So when it's rainy, that's a good time to start throwing out lightning attacks. Harsh sunlight cannot be chilled or doused. Someone was playing a Pokemon at this point, apparently. Harsh sunlight.
Mm-hmm.
All fire attacks deal an additional D4 damage. But it's hard to see. All ranges suffer -1 to a minimum of 1. Hazy moonlight. All ranges suffer -1. All soul attacks deal plus D4 damage. Deep gloom can only draw line of sight to adjacent tiles or those in bright light. Gleam techniques create a burst 2 area of light when used. This burst lasts until the user's next riff. So you can light up deep gloom with your attacks. That's pretty fun.
Mm-hmm.
Fog. All ranged attacks suffer demerit. Wind attacks remove the fog tile their targets are on. Strong winds. All ranged physical attacks suffer demerit. When a fighter flies, for every tile they enter, they have a 50% chance of being blown away by the winds, stopping their movement immediately and becoming juggled. Hail. Ice falls from the air. Every fighter that starts their riff suffers D4 damage. Your speed is -2. Thunderstorm has the longest description. Lightning echoes all around. At the start of your riff, if you're near anything that conducts electricity or wearing anything metal, electricity crackles about you. If you end your riff without doing anything about the electricity, you get struck by lightning. Suffer damage equal to 66 damage. Now they've been playing Breath of the Wild. You can remove the lightning warning by going away from anything that conducts electricity or removing the metal. At the start of every resound, a player must roll 3 d20s onto the battlefield. Every tile a d20 lands on is struck by lightning, inflicting true damage equal to the number on the d20 plus 3d6. What? 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 Okay. Thunderstorm is a fuck you weather.
Mm-hmm. Although, I might have to get a little bit creative if I wanted to use Thunderstorm in a VTT.
Mm-hmm.
Though this does mean that somebody could get struck by lightning and take. I was gonna say take a small amount of damage, but then again, there's 3d6 part of that.
I mean, you could take the lowest you could take is 4 damage.
Mm-hmm. So imagine someone getting struck by lightning and then going only 4 damage. And
why do I feel you staring at me?
Why indeed? And Hydra saying anything about snowstorms?
Hydra? I don't believe that there would be. This game is primarily inspired by Southeast Asia, Hydra, with a particular focus on pre-colonial folklore from the Philippines. That entire area of the world doesn't really get a lot of snow almost ever.
And believe me, if they do, we're all gonna know about it.
Yeah, they will. They will scream at us. Don't worry.
Mm-hmm. And it'll be like what happens whenever I go down south and there's 1 inch of snow.
Mm-hmm. Well, 1 inch of snow for people who've only ever lived in the south.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but then we have the advanced rules. What follows is a list of special rules that might not come up as frequently, but are important when having to solve weirder events and interactions. Generally, however, the law of bloody they follow the law of bloody gold, a continuation of the rule of rosy gold.
And for those who don't, I don't think we ever covered the law of rosy gold, did we?
The rule of rosy gold. I think we did at one point, but it's been a while. So what?
Okay, I'm there. I'm already there.
Yep.
The law of rosy gold. Before anything, warrior, understand the concept of fiction. When you play an RPG, you sit around with your friends and have a shared collective imagination where the game takes place. This space is known as the fiction. Everything must adhere and follow the fiction as established. If you've established that your sword is a flame, then when you swing it at a bramble that has been established to be flammable, either by the Umala god or by collective decision of the group, then the bramble is set on fire. The intended fiction of Gubat-Banwa is nowhere close to real life. It is mythic and fantastic. Don't attempt to use hard science or calculations to get the upper hand. We're not simulating reality. The fiction of Gubat-Banwa is high dramatics, high stakes martial arts. If something impossible is introduced, take it at face value and find out why that happens. Fiction first does not mean simulation. The physics of Gubat-Banwa is not the physics of our world. Fires ignite because of mystical utterings or because of the anger of a god, not strictly and not because of chemical interactions. Much of the fiction will be established by techniques and lore given in this book. As with any RPG, for the fiction to truly blossom, everyone must be on the same page as to what the fiction is. That's the law of Rosy Gold. Basically, treat the game as a game. Stop trying to treat the game as science. Treat the game as a game.
A harder concept than one would think it would be for some.
It is it is at once the easiest fucking concept in the world for anyone with two brain cells to rub together, and the hardest fucking concept for those wearing rosy glasses that have sucked all their brains out their ears.
Mm-hmm. But the law of bloody gold is basically, and I'm going to be skimming this a bit. If a rule cannot be justified or does not follow from the fiction or drama, then ignore that rule or mechanic. Simple as. This is basically Rule 0.
Not just Rule 0, but it's specific over generic as well.
Mm-hmm. Though I do want to point something out here. Work with the fiction, not against it. Remember, combat is role-playing. Role-playing is combat. It is expression. Nothing in this game delineates the role-playing from the mechanics. That is an important thing to note because a lot of people, and some of whom we've had the pleasure and displeasure of speaking with, have this idea of combat and role-playing being two mutually exclusive concepts. Because they have 20-sided brain rot.
I don't even think that's 20-sided brain rot at that point, Monk, because there's plenty of things in the D20 bubble, or even in the world's most litigious role-playing game, where role-playing does happen in combat.
Let me rephrase it. They have fudge dice brain rot.
Ooh. Oh, ow. Ooh. Ow. Ow. Ow, Monk. I can hear them screaming from here. Jesus. I like it. Let's do some more.
No tears, please. It's a waste of good suffering.
Well, I mean, and we try to encourage role-playing in the middle of everything as we can. So, be that as it may. Continue on, Monk.
Mm-hmm. Let's see, then the Wandering Dog Hero. If you're playing solo and the enemies number more than double the number of fighters on your side of the battlefield, your side has a number of rifts equal to the enemies per resound, though not consecutively as much as possible, and a single fighter should not riff again if another fighter is on your side has not riffed. Braves and chiefs are counted as 2 fighters and 4 fighters respectively for the purposes of counting. And there's a sidebar. With this mechanic, one Kanduganon would have riff thrice per resound when fighting 3 enemies. A Kanduganon and their companion against 5 enemies have 5 riffs to share. The companion might riff twice and the Kanduganon thrice. The riffs must be as equal as possible.
Nice. And there's Aura.
Yep. So some effects we'll talk about. Aura it is essentially a burst. It's more or less talking about what was already mentioned with Aura. The Iron Law, if you're dividing anything, always round down. The Rule of 1, if you reduce anything, very often they cannot go below 1. Marks is self-explanatory. Your marks and all marks against you go away when you are defeated. Flanking, to figure out if you're flanking, draw a line between your tile and the flanking allies. If it crosses at least 2 sides or corners of the flanked fighter's tile, then they are flanked. That is a good thing to point out because, again, this is another case of old habits. A lot of people have this idea that flanking only matters when it's to melee characters.
Mm-hmm.
This opens up the possibility of ranged flanking. Let's see, then Thunderbolts.
Well,
go ahead.
Well, hold on. Flanking still has to be in an adjacent tile.
All right, never.
If I remember correctly, under tactical considerations when I read it.
Mm-hmm.
If you and an ally are standing directly on both sides or corners of a target, you are flanking. Your melee attacks gain merit against the flank fighter. It is a melee thing.
Mm-hmm.
This is just a way to mark whether you are flanking or not. So what this is trying to do is show you, hey, if you're standing on these 2 squares that are adjacent to this character, you're not flanking. But if you're standing on these 2 other squares, then you are flanking.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. From there we get to Thunderbolts. Remember that you can use Thunderbolts in combat. No shit! There's an entire section about them. And they're related to your fucking liberations. It's actually recommended to use Thunderbolts in battle if you want to survive the tides of battle.
Mm-hmm.
There's a sidebar here, Monk. The games that inspired Gubat-Banwa's combat, Final Fantasy Tactics and Sayuki, are naturalistic in the sense that they ground their fights within their world's nature instead of void fight area. Gubat-Banwa is naturalistic as well. Use that to your advantage.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's map design. As you can probably tell, Gubat-Banwa is a game that places a large emphasis on verticality. Elevations have always been a bit of a bitch to think about, especially now the game has so much of its design around it. How can you make your own for your games? My first piece of advice is to look at your warband and see if they have mechanics that really need elevation. If not, then you can maybe get away with minimal height differences. A couple of +1s and +2s, maybe a +3. A couple of -1s and -2s, maybe a -4. It still makes for a markedly different experience compared to a flat battle map. However, as already stated, a lot of the disciplines do care about your elevation, and Vantage is one of the easiest ways to add merit to your attacks. I forgot the word add. So how do you go about it? First, how to mark it out. How do you mark out the elevation differences? If you have pre-made maps, this is easy. Anything that makes sense as higher elevation is elevation. However, if you're doing something on the fly, how do you mark it? What I've been doing is pretty basic. Colors. White tiles are anything 0 elevation. Grasslands, marshes. Then light gray are tiles +1. Dark gray +2, black or +3. Makes sense, right, Monk?
Mm-hmm.
Considering how tall you are.
Fuck off.
Heh. Then you start using RGB for everything past that. Red for +4, green for +5, blue for +6, etc. It'll be very rare that you'll need anything past +4, though. And I'm going to take the rest of this as well. It just seems to be a natural flow. Then, inspiration. Look at Final Fantasy Tactics, Tactics Ogre, or Sayuki Journey to the West maps. One thing they emphasize is this almost a diorama-like squished together feel. Think of a piece of paper that's been pushed together, creating wrinkles and creases and peaks. Landforms are kind of made the same way. What that means is that often you should pick a particular side of a map that has the highest elevation. Either the top, the bottom, the middle, the right, or the left. If you want to get fancy, choose 3 streaks of the map. Then, the trick. Now that you've chosen the parts of your map that will have the most variability, the streaks, the trick now is to set everything else at a different elevation. The base elevation is now +2. What does that mean for your streaks? Are they higher? Ridges, steep forest outcroppings, rising hills, lower. Trenches, pits, dips in the landscape. Feel free to play around with this. Try aiming for a variance of +6 to -6 elevation of your base elevation. If the base elevation is +2, then look for a way to get -4 or +8 in there. Now, the details. With this in mind, you still have to create the map according to the fiction established. If they're fighting in front of a monastery, then put a monastery in the middle. That could be a major elevation change. You don't even have to make it enterable. Make it so that in the fiction, the monastery is barricaded from the inside. Remember that at the beginning of a fight, each Kandunganon can introduce an object, terrain, or a change in elevation. You can anticipate this or use this to your advantage. Set up the fiction, they'll do the rest. Oh, this map should probably have deep water somewhere if we're in a gorge. Or, oh, why don't we put a few trees here, or brambles, or dangerous terrain considering we're in the deep wood. Everyone should be invited to the map. It's the third pillar of Gubat-Banwa's gameplay, after all. Then there's a small sidebar. I encourage you to have fun with this particular part of the game. It's still play. You should have fun in the act of making maps in and of themselves. The medium of TTRPGs encourages this.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the end of it. Now we've reached the compendium.
Yep. And the compendium, the first thing it does is disciplines, which we've already covered. The latter things, anting and non-player characters, we're going to be covering over the next few weeks. But the base vibe when it comes to combat, there's very much a lot to like with this system. I appreciate that it's using a variety of dice, but also there's advantages and disadvantages to the dice that are used when it comes to inflicting violence. The damage is still present, but it isn't, or rather, calculating damage, but it isn't exactly roll for hit and then roll for damage, which is something we had hinted at. We're not sure if it's actually how much of it is actually going to be there technically yet.
Mm-hmm.
In the MCDM RPG. We have the fact that we're using an action point system,
Mm-hmm.
and that makes a lot of the disciplines that use flurry very interesting.
Yeah, because flurry is part of the same technique or attack, so it doesn't count as a second attack in that system and doesn't suffer the 2 demerits.
Yeah,
At least that's how I read it.
and there's now granted some the status effects. I'm glad that it is very much built upon proccing. This is giving me a lot of flashbacks to the design philosophy we saw with Brother Tanner.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot of team play here.
Yeah,
A lot of setup and payoff.
and that's very much the case with a lot of the buffs and debuffs. There are certainly more debuffs than there were buffs, but I don't think that's a deal breaker because the ones that are there are ones that will be relevant. I think even with our game we had that where we had more debuffs than we had buffs.
Yeah, pretty sure. I can check the combat chapter real quick. I already have it open for it. Yeah, we have 8 positive conditions and like 18 negative conditions or so.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah. I think that's actually par for the course for a lot of games, though. You don't tend to have a lot of positive effects because most of your positive effects are broad blankets of things. Like, looking to Final Fantasy, since that's our game. Protect, Shell, Regen, Auto Life, Float, etc. Those are broad boots. Protect is everything physical. Shell is everything magical. Reflect reflects magic. Auto Life revives you from the dead at 0. That's an auto trigger. Whereas a lot of the negative status effects that you can get throughout the games are more specific things, and they usually do something very specific to your character. Blind makes you miss physical attacks more often. Silence makes it so you can't cast spells. Confused makes you attack yourself or the party. Sleep puts you to sleep and make you unable to act until the next time you're hit. Poison does damage over time. These things are very specific compared to the blanket boons of positive status effects, and I think that's just how status effects in general tend to work. I mean, there are probably some specific examples if I put some real thought into it, where there are very specific positive status effects as well. In fact, some of the things in Emberwind actually, adding very specific bonuses to like your barrier values and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But even then, there still tends to be more negative things that can happen to you than positive things that are very granular. If I had to boil it down, positive tends to be holistic. Negative tends to be granular. I guess the best ways to put it.
I'm just glad that it's a case where buffs and debuffs are not just, oh, this modifies the dice.
Yeah.
Oh, because that is something of a bad habit that I've seen in some games, and it's very much, it is an artifact of Blades in the Dark, and some of the games that succeed Blades in the Dark, including Fabula Ultima, and I'm not a fan of it there because it basically makes all the debuffs the exact same, just modifying it, dice, and that's not going to be interesting. That's number go up or number go down.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, the when I look back at the techniques, um, that we've seen, now that we understand how flurry works and how the mantras work, that puts a lot of techniques in a brand new light. I'd say the biggest ones are the flurry ones are put in a new light, but also the way attacks work.
Mantras stack. I think that's the big one.
Yes.
The fact that mantras stack, that's it's huge. Like if we go back to any of the disciplines we've already looked at. I mean, let's go look at some of my favorite. Why don't I?
There's also the fact that most forms of inflicted violence or techniques or the like always, with rare exception, take up just one beat.
Yeah, well, going back to one of my favorite disciplines from the very last set of disciplines in the Baha'i Kingdom, the Heaven Spear. There's, because these are the guys who can, when they're juggled, they gain the Thunderbolt and then replace juggled with Unbound. Their inflict violences, two of them have elemental mantras, lightning and wind.
Mm-hmm.
Then looking at their liberation techniques, it's two mantras, lightning and true, and then the relentless, which pierces through stuff. And then their ultimate, the Pansan Sinokobang Bulusok, is lightning, wind, true, and relentless. And also hits the whole battlefield.
Mm-hmm.
So they absolutely do amazing things. Every discipline does. And I kind of feel like maybe I didn't. Yeah, physical is, like I said, physical is self-explanatory. But there was a note that I didn't really look at or mention that is in the physical attack type mantra that says, often physical attacks have larger violence dice. Which is true.
This also means, unlike some games, where you're not having a situation where the casters are doing the bulk of the damage output.
Well, and the big thing is, what is a caster and what is not a caster? Much like we pointed out with East Asia and other Asian influences before, the melding of caster and non-caster is all over the place here. Like, again, the Heaven Spear does a lot of physical attacks, but there were other raider types that did magical attacks too, and there were mediums and witches that you would expect to mostly be magical, some doing some really physical stuff like pushing people around the field. It's you can't really say, oh, these are primarily casters and these are primarily martial. No, first of all, they're all martial. Fuck you. Every one of them is martial. That's the point of the game.
Yeah.
Second of all, they're all just these amalgamations. And so it's really fun to see that there's no real separation, I guess is the best word. The separation is your role in battle, rather than whether you're martial or caster.
Mm-hmm. That certainly makes sense. And I'd say I'd also say that because of how it's set up, the freneticness comes from the use of thunderbolts, and the fact that everybody has a means of getting them and using them. And this is not subtle about the fact that you should be gaining and using thunderbolts all the damn time. But I do like the role-based initiative approach, because I feel like that is a much better fit for this than a standard rolling of initiative affair. We're once again doing sides-based initiative.
Mm-hmm.
Also, as mentioned before, jump is actually useful, because how often does somebody use jump or climb or the like in a lot of TTRPGs?
And in this case, it isn't a skill; it's just part of your normal movement.
Mm-hmm. But it's something that only seems to get used in very, very specific circumstances.
Yeah. Well, in this case, the way that they're using jump is almost exactly like the jump or height stat in the tactics games, in Final Fantasy Tactics.
Mm-hmm.
The ones that tell you how much of an elevation change you can make while moving. And, well, a lot. The answer is a lot. Depends on what your class is, but the answer is a lot. Or discipline, excuse me. Discipline is.
Yeah.
Old habits die hard.
Even with our own game, old habits die hard.
Yeah, I sometimes refer to the jobs as classes and then go, wait a minute, that's not right.
Mm-hmm. But with that said, I think Gubat-Banwa is continuing its no misses pattern that we've had for a good while. Next time that we tackle it, I believe we are going to be handling Anting.
Anting.
Which I could describe as magic items, but that's selling it a little bit short.
A lot of it short.
Mm-hmm. Then again, with some of our audience, selling something a little bit short might be a little redundant. But now, obviously, tomorrow we are going to be back here for Archilon Chronicles.
Mm-hmm.
And on Sunday will be the triumphant return of Geek Watch. This time around, tackling somebody who I feel is overdue. It's been a good amount of time since we did a good old fashioned roasting of somebody in film.
Mm.
But with that said, as always, a sincere thanks goes out to everyone who took the time out of their schedule to come onto the show and enjoy the madness. And there'll be plenty more where that came from, as there always is here, on the open bar of the internet. But until then, on behalf of the good brothers present and not present, my name is Mildra. I am your gaming monk. Stay fucking frosty, everybody.